Okay, so as the old Geico commercial went, it's hump day. And it's not one of those hump days that you're just slowly trying to get over into Thursday just to get to Friday. Because, first of all, we are very excited to have Andy Hart here in the Pass Interference Podcast. You hear him on WEEI and the Six Rings and Football Things podcast. But I woke up to my phone blowing up with this story from ESPN. That's not the first time that's happened. Certainly not the first time for you. And you were up at 4:15, yes?
Yes. Very early day. And yes, my phone started to blow up too. And I was like, what the hell is this? Can I have a few minutes to myself?
Yes, you were being a great dad today, taking your son on college visits. Meanwhile, I was just rolling over. Did all of this tweeting from bed, reading this ESPN story. It's about Bill Belichick, his failed job search, which we have breaking news now that seems to go against that because he has a job at least for draft weekend, and we'll get to that in a second. But there was one particular nugget that we just have to spend most of today on because it is certainly dominating the conversation where you work at WEI. Here in this little podcast, it will be on TV later, probably for a couple of days, which, putting my journalist hat aside, just as a content creator, thank God the content gods have answered our prayers of something other than the hashtag take Drake. All credit to you for that. And you and I are aligned on that. And the draft conversation of the quarterbacks, it's just nice to have a little something different. No?
Absolutely. And it's funny because I have another podcast I'll be doing a little later on for the Six Rings with Mike Cadlick. And we really weren't sure what we were doing. And I said, don't worry. We're lucky. It's Boston. Like something pops up. And thanks to ESPN and their sources, we have this latest, expose, which you've been a part of some of these exposés as well from the Boston Herald, more season-long exposés. And the more and more I get these, like, you know what jumps out at me just always, like, all our instincts, all the things we kind of think are happening behind the scenes or the feelings or the Cold Wars or whatever you want to call them, they're always validated in the end. Like we're almost always right. Like none of this is made up crap. In the end, our gut instincts and like our sniff test, something smells a little funny here. It's usually because something is rotten.
Andy, are you more of a sniff test guy or an eye test guy?
Sniff. Absolutely sniff. Absolutely. Give it a sniff. I do. Yeah. Lunch meat. Sometimes you get that lunch meat that's been in there. You're like, what's the date on this? When did we get this piece of turkey? And then like, is it reflecting in a rainbow shade when you hold it to the light? But then you give it the sniff and you're like, let's roll the dice.
Yeah. Or the lone sock on the floor. Like mine are older socks. So there's like the sniff test for the dirty sock because eye test is doing nothing for me. But I like to poke fun at those, right? Like it's draft season, it's silly season. I beat this to death in terms of the news and the rumbles and the whispers and the reporting, but also just in the verbiage that we use. Which if it's May 3rd or August 26th, and you start saying some of the things that we use to describe players, you just sound ridiculous because they're all ridiculous. I will say though, you bring up Mike Cadlick, and in the spirit of honesty, which is somewhat part of this story from ESPN. Cadlick and Fitzy came on my podcast last week, and I opened, as I tend to do, with some sort of crack. And this time, though, it came at your expense. And, of course, it was a big-headed crack. But in the process of making one and then acknowledging I am a 7 3/4 problem up top with my hat size, Fitzy revealed that he is a size 8, which then made me wonder, first of all, how I didn't catch it in the first time because I did it on rewatch, taking notes, just blasting myself as I critique old podcasts. But also, how the hell does he not catch all the flack that you do for having a dome that has its own gravitational pull in the way that his personality pulls us in with his charisma? And he gets off scot-free and you do not.
This is a great lesson. This is a great lesson in perception is reality. And it doesn't matter what the facts are, whatever the perception is that's out there. It's like I get my balls busted for having a big head. Fitzy's head is bigger. I get my balls busted for being short. On the Patriots beat, I'm either tall or at least average. I mean, there's plenty of, if I stand next to Reese and Sosi, I'm feeling pretty damn good about myself, but I'm the short guy who gets his balls busted on the internet and Twitter. So yes, once it becomes like a story, I'm a little like Jacoby Myers. Like once he was branded not worthy of the NFL and a slow receiver, how long has it taken for people to realize, wait, this Jacoby Myers guy seems like he's an NFL receiver. I don't care what 40 time he ran or how slow he is. That's my story. My head's not that big.
What size?
I'm not that short.
On the record, what's the size?
So I'm like a 7 7/8, I think. But
okay.
The issue is, I think I don't know if there's an upward measurement. So like
that's a great point.
Don't seem like sometimes I get a hat that goes the circumference, but there's not enough room for like the dome part. Like I need a convertible. And that's why, hence the visors, the
Visor.
convertible allows this to seep out the top.
Yeah, plus some hair up there. So look, there are other bald guys in and around the beat. I don't really catch much flack for it. I think I should. So if you want to fire off a crack anytime here on the
Nope.
podcast, by all means.
No.
But I buried the lead, which again is in relation to the ESPN story. I said Belichick has a new job. Let me tell you what that is. Again, according to the Pat McAfee show, 5 minutes ago, right as we are about to open this podcast, Bill Belichick will be contributing to ESPN's coverage of the draft live from Detroit and working with the Pat McAfee show in a capacity that I didn't bother to figure out, which maybe I should have because we had to record this podcast. I sent you the link a couple minutes late, and here we are. But it will be good to see Bill on television. He was smiling in this appearance with Pat McAfee. You said they've been working on this deal for a month and a half, and your reaction to that was what?
I think it's good. First of all, I've known for a long time, sort of through sources, hearing people talk, that Bill was caring more about his image with an eye on media post coaching career or sort of the transitional phase, whenever that would be, and talking to people like, how do I look better? How do I come off better? How do I do these things to show people or try to make real this idea that the Bill you see in press conferences isn't Bill, that's an act or a facade or, a function of what he's trying to do. And I think there's no better place. First of all, it's a soft landing spot with an edge. And what I mean by that is if you watched Game Day, nobody pumped Bill's tires more than Pat McAfee. I mean, he basically did things you're not supposed to do on television to the man on television. So there's going to be a friendly world there, but it's also a modern, edgy world. I mean, this is the guy who's also the lead commentator at WrestleMania, right? And his guys are his guys, and they say Boston Connor and these guys are saying things that, just popping questions off. So while it's a safe space to some degree, it's not a boring safe space that won't resonate with, I don't know, 30-somethings that maybe still want to love Bill Belichick and want to figure out how they're going to love him in his media career. So I actually think this is a great spot for him to kind of boost his Q rating into whatever he wants to become off the football field.
I think that's the right takeaway. I think it's the most important one. It is interesting because I had not heard that before, and I'm really glad you shared it here that Bill has been collecting feedback on that because
Yep.
clearly, whether it was the cutoff sweaters or the Zoom appearances or any of the press conferences, the man did not care. And I think the man largely does not care about perception, whether it's the press conferences or all the books you can read about him or whatever. But now that he's in this space, media is all perception, baby. Like he's got to change that. And it's interesting to me, two things. One, that on that same game day show, before Bill had come on, they had Robert Kraft. And McAfee's doing the same thing. He's pumping his tires, talking about how great he is, how smart he is, how things have gone for the Patriots. But at the very end, twists the knife a little bit, saying, we all know what you have to do. We all know. You don't have to say it, which meant
Right.
fire Bill. And then 30 minutes later, here comes Bill pumping the tire doing all that. And I think it is, to your point, a good, edgy, safe space for Bill to show a little bit more personality. But secondarily, I don't know if that's the target audience that he needs to win over, right? Like he's doing this in media to ultimately get back in the game. And Robert Kraft said he watched Pat McAfee. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But is Jerry Jones watching Pat McAfee? Are the Maras watching Pat McAfee? Is Jeffrey Lurie with the Eagles watching Pat McAfee? And I said all those owners for a very specific reason. But it's an interesting spot that he's chosen, but obviously it's strategic, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I do think there's probably different groups of owners, but I can tell you, just from sort of observing over the years, the Krafts have an interest in, say, Barstool. Like they're aware
Yeah.
of what is being written and said in Barstool. And the leap from McAfee to Barstool, obviously there's sort of a familial connection there. I'm guessing Jerry Jones, just based on his personality and the way he's handled himself, stays aware of McAfee, Barstool, that world. And I do think there are probably some owners. And I would also even argue, I think that's a key factor here. Bill is not young, but if he can seem young, it might help him get a job because as we sort of transition here into the ESPN story we're going to talk about, I thought they really kind of buried the lead way, way, way deep in that story. One source says, if Bill was 63, this might be a different story. Yeah, no crap. He's not. He's knocking on the door of being the oldest coach in NFL history. That's Romeo Crennel with the Texans a couple years ago when he was 73 years old. Bill is going to be 73 soon, probably when he hits the field again, if he hits the field again. Pete Carroll, was just ahead of him at 73. What do those guys have in common? They're not in it's a young man's game. So, and it always has been. That's what's important for me is like we can throw around Paul Brown and whoever else you want, old names. They were never older than what Bill is. Like he was going into uncharted territory for aging coaches at a time when the world and people get mad at me. They call me an ageist. Well,
No.
I'm not hiring. I'm not in a position to discriminate Bill Belichick. I don't have that power. I couldn't possibly do it. All I do is talk about him. But I don't know when it stopped being okay to say, well, he's 72 and that's kind of real world old. Like we all have parents. I don't know, your parents, we all have parents. We deal with things. Like you see them differently at 50, 60, 70 if you're fortunate and they get to 80 and they continue, right? There's an evolution in them where you may be helping them more. You may be doing things
Well,
for them.
how about Robert Kraft? Like you
Right.
take that into the 80s. His public appearances the last couple of years have everyone going, is it time
Not,
to take the keys away? Is it time to
not
call
great.
up the assisted living? Don't call it a nursing home for Robert. And obviously that's an extreme example, but I think it speaks to what you're saying. And it's a
Yeah.
great point. I find that persuasive that McAfee might not be the target audience in terms of the demographic 25 to 54 for men that are watching that show. But the rub off that it'll have on Bill, you will look younger. You will have this kind of energy about you that people looking at the raw number 72 until this time next year when he turned 73. Small nugget that this story drops the day after his birthday was like, did they just do him solid by waiting and not spoil the big 7-2 celebration? Okay, so I know we talk a lot about the draft in this podcast. It's a football podcast. It's a Patriots podcast. What else are we going to do until April 25th? Well, let me tell you, soon enough, we are going to turn our attention to the Celtics and Bruins because they're getting in on the playoff action. And so can you with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where right now you can win up to 100 times your money with as few as 4 correct picks with basketball, hockey, and other sports on Prize Picks. And I'll tell you, look, I like Prize Picks for baseball too. The Red Sox just started up. They're playing the Mariners, the A's. I put a little money down and I got a lot more money back. So download the app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. I did the same. Again, download the app today. Use code CLNS at Prize Picks for a first deposit match up to $100, and you can do the same. Basketball, hockey, and baseball. We got a lot to do until the draft, and you can find it all at Prize Picks. But you mentioned the story. Let's get into it. That's a veteran host move, longtime radio guy, Patriots.com, everything. You mentioned the story. So again, the way it was billed on the site, I think, was smart in that the national appeal is still Belichick, right? Nationally, outside of New England, people do not care about squabbles between Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick. What they care about is where the greatest coach of all time might be coaching next. And here are some tidbits before we get to the Kraft-Belichick dynamic, which is going to soak up most of the rest of the show. Belichick was blindsided, reportedly, by the Falcons hiring Raheem Morris. Believed right up until the minute that he was told, hey, we're going with somebody else, that he thought he was going to get the job. He was not among the top 3 choices for any of the Falcons' head decision makers. Owner Arthur Blank, Terry Fontenot, their GM, Greg Beatles, their president, Rich McKay, their CEO, has since been moved on. And so his interests now are to do TV with Omaha Productions and Peyton Manning. He's writing a book about football leadership. And next year, he believes he will get a head coaching job. So there are a lot of details in there. But oh, by the way, after Bill has this excellent one-on-one on this $180 million, 295-foot yacht, the size of a football field, okay, with Arthur Blank on January 15th, 4 days after he said, so long, New England, Arthur Blank and Robert Kraft get on the phone. And I'm going to read from this for a little bit, and then I want your immediate reaction once I finish this segment we call Andrew Reads on the podcast.
I like it.
Quote, this is from the story. It goes over all the details. Again, great one-on-one. It lasts about 4 hours or so, January 15th. In the days after, before Bill has a second interview with the full panel, this is what ESPN, Don Van Natta, Seth Wickersham, Jeremy Fowler wrote. Quote, despite that friendly first session, the unthinkable happened for a billionaire and a legendary coach. Blank and Belichick checked each other's references. Blank spoke by phone at least twice to Robert Kraft. And among NFL owners, Blank considers Kraft his closest friend. Publicly, Kraft and Blank have said Kraft expressed only support and offered praise of his former head coach. But in a conversation with Blank, Kraft delivered a stark assessment of Belichick's character, according to a source who spoke to 2 people, a close Kraft friend and a longtime Belichick confidant. The source quoted the Belichick source as saying, quote, Robert called Arthur to warn him not to trust Bill, end quote. That account was backed up, the source said, by the close Kraft friend. So you read that, and what entered your mind?
Um, I actually wrote it down. First thing I did with like, it was one of those murder investigations where you put a couple pins and then you got to tie them together.
Yeah.
Cause I wanted to make sure what I was like, who said what? Cause there's a little bit of a kind of 4 degrees of separation here. So I don't ever question sources. I just don't, just in general, I try not to do that. When I read your exposés in the Boston Herald, I try to trust you as a reporter until it's proven you're wrong. And then from then on out, I now have to question your sources, question your reporting. And that's why I think it's so important in our business or like law enforcement. A cop can never be proven to lie on the stand because that can invalidate every case he's ever testified in type
Mhm.
thing. So I try, but I do want to understand it. And I think sometimes things can get lost in sourcing or translation. And it concerns me here, the degrees of separation. So you have Bill and Robert, who are that first level. Then you have a friend of both that then is tied into a source who then is tied into these reporters, correct?
Yes.
So if you were ever a kid at one of those parties and played the operator game, even if nobody's lying, sometimes things change as they're told once, twice, three. It's like the fish story that got away. It was this big and it was this
Yeah.
big. Even if you're not trying to mislead, like your hands just kind of get bigger and you fluff it up. So that was my first thing. And then the second part was, what's the motivation here? And I know they say Robert and blank are very close. Blank considers Robert his best friend in the NFL owners circles. But you and I both heard Robert on January, whatever that was, 15th, say, Bill's going to be on the sideline with a different logo and a different cutoff sweatshirt or whatever. His tone was, Bill's going to coach this year. Like I
Yes.
thought
The
Robert was
farewell press
expressing.
conference on the 11th. So this is 4
Okay.
days before the interview. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So
Yep.
before that, I thought his whole tone was he was aware and accepting that Bill would be on a sideline, right? Like he was comfortable with that. He was kind of voicing it to us. And so now he's attempting to undercut him through these conversations, which again might be with a friend, might be honest. And then there's that weird thing of I brought up earlier, like ageism and HR rules. Isn't the cliche joke always you don't give a negative recommendation, you just confirm the person worked there? Right? Like, isn't that sort of the widely held view? If they call and you didn't like the person and you have a lot of maybe negative things to say, you just say, I can confirm he worked here from 2000 to 2024 January, and that's all I really would like to say, right?
Are you speaking from experience here, Andy? Because I've never, ever in my entire life, ever experienced anything like what you're talking about.
Um, but yeah, like so, and then there's like the motivation. Is it just because it's your friend? Because the flip side of that, I say, if you really think Bill is so untrustworthy, isn't that a good thing that another team has a bad dynamic between its head coach and its owner? Like, doesn't that make it more difficult for maybe the Falcons to do good business? And you now are competing with 30 other teams because you believe the Falcons might be a mess because their owner and their coach can't trust each other. Um, so these were all sort of the bullet points that flew through my head. But the biggest thing I took away was, yeah, Robert, you told us you didn't trust him. I watched the Dynasty. You told me that after the Eagles Super Bowl, the first time in your career you believed you couldn't trust him to do what was in the best interest of the football team, right? Wasn't that on the record for every Apple TV Plus subscriber to see? He told us that. So I guess that was a long-winded answer. Sorry, it's your podcast.
No, it's you hit on a lot of really important points, and I'm glad that you delivered them, first on the front end, so I can confirm now because there's a lot there, and it's not even in the story; it's just within the larger context of the journalism that you and I try to do, and you were very, very careful. So, first of all, I have all the respect in the world with Seth Wickersham, who's been in this podcast. I am friendly with his stories speak from himself. He's been validated. The 2017 story that broke out Jimmy G, Alex Guerrero, Tom Brady, Belichick the Rift, all of it. He's
Yep.
written the book on the dynasty, better than the book called The Dynasty. They should have made his book into a documentary. Don Van Natta, Pulitzer Prize winner, the New York Times, covered presidents. Okay. Jeremy Fowler, been in the business for a long time. NFL Insider work also speaks for itself. Full stop there. Specific to this story, again, I'm not guessing about sources. I've heard people do this with my sources. You're all wrong. The practice of me going out, though, and saying that, first of all, I can do so now, months removed from certain stories and years removed from others. The reason you don't react or say, hey, you're wrong, that's not right, is first of all, it gives power to those conversations, that speculation, because you're involved in it. What it
Right.
also does is it shrinks the pool of possible candidates if you choose to believe me, which then increases the likelihood that you will then know who eventually it is if you keep playing this guessing game. I am here to tell the story truthfully as best that I can around the Patriots and to protect the people who volunteered their information to me and trusted me to protect them in the process. So again, I'm not going to do that to Seth, to Don, to Jeremy. But it cannot be said enough that this source, again, I will read from the story, according to a source who spoke to two people, a close Kraft friend and a longtime Belichick confidant. Okay, that is the bedrock upon which this story rests. That Kraft called Arthur Blank and said, hey, man, not your guy. Don't trust him. You can't do it. You shouldn't do it. And so what you have is the same person delivering not a first-hand account of being on the phone, not a second-hand account of hearing what that phone call was like, but a third-hand account who's also, by the way, close with Kraft and close with Bill, who we know are not close together anymore and
Right.
haven't been for a long time, thanks to these same reporters and excellent reporting on that part, which allows, as you said, a lot of room for interpretation, sloppiness, and I would also point out power to that person to influence and control this story. And I'm not saying you shouldn't trust Don or Seth or Jeremy, but that is a lot of trust they put in that person and a lot of trust that person put in the Kraft friend and the Belichick confidant to know exactly what was said, to be relayed to their friends, to be relayed to them, and then for them to relay to more reporters. That is what this whole thing is built upon. And it feels a little flimsy to me. This is not to defend Kraft. If you asked me to bet whether or not this conversation took place, Robert offered some sort of feedback. I'm betting that it did. We all know the relationship, how it ended, everything. And that's thanks to their excellent reporting in a separate story towards the end of the season, as well as some of the work we've done at the Herald. But we just have to understand the layers upon which, the house of cards upon which this part of the story rests, because it is that fragile, that delicate.
And I would also argue that what I talked about earlier, sort of the tone or the details of the information, the lack of trustworthiness, which is important. Is it tied specifically to, for example, Bill's claim, reported elsewhere in this story, that he's comfortable working with Terry Fontenot and the rest of the power structure? He's not looking for the coach, GM, full power that he had. Could that be the area where Robert's saying you can't trust him? He's telling you he'll work with others, but he's not going to enjoy working with others. Or is this a um, undercutting of his character? Like if you just say a
Yes.
person in general is not trustworthy, that's a person you don't want to leave your wallet around. You don't want to leave your kids with for the weekend, whatever. But there's people that I wouldn't trust with certain things. Like I just know them. I know how their instincts are. I know how their emotions get them. And those can be two very different things. The one person I don't want in my life. He's not trustworthy. He's not someone I want around. The other, I just know certain situations where he's not going to make a good decision.
Well, and they use the word character. So I think it's the latter. You don't
I
want them in
know.
your life, maybe professional life, but that's the word ESPN chose to use. So that's where we've got to work from.
So when did Robert learn this year? Not the first 24 years he worked with Bill Belichick. He was trustworthy for 24 years or 20 what. And even I referenced the Eagles Super Bowl, which
Mhm.
always bothered me in the dynasty. And we've all done that. We don't need to
Yes.
litigate that. But so you decided he wasn't making the best interest of your football team. And then you allowed him to make the biggest decision in the history of your football team and push Tom Brady out the door? Those are contradictory to me. I don't know how you can. It's like your wife slept with another dude once, but we'll give her one more shot. Like, no, I'm not sure I'm giving her another shot if that's how I truly feel it went down. And this whole thing bothers me. It just bothers me. And I know I feel this is where I'll come off as like Andy, the Massachusetts born, like Patriot fan, loved Andre Tippett when he was 8 years old kid. But like, why do we have to keep doing this? Like, why
No,
do we
it's
have
a
to keep
great question.
doing
It's a
this?
beautiful
Like,
question.
you guys were two of the most successful people in the history of football in your jobs. You're the greatest owner. You're not in the hall yet. You're going to be in the hall. I'm just telling you, Robert, you'll be in the hall someday. So relax. I hope you live to be in the hall, but I think you're going to be in the hall. And Bill, They call you the greatest coach of all time. Everybody just says it like it's a fact. I don't actually believe it. I don't actually think it's a fact, but that's a separate podcast for a separate day. Why do we have to keep doing this? This little like petty snarkiness. I mean, I feel like some of this is when I deal with my 13-year-old daughter and she's telling me stories about school and girls and friends and circle groups and someone did this and someone like, no, they have reason to do that. They're not mature and they haven't accomplished anything in life, these young girls in middle school and high school. Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft are goats. Why do we have to keep doing this?
It's a great question, and something you said earlier about, okay, when did you discover Bill was supposedly not trustworthy? Again, if we trust a source, and I want to reiterate for folks who hear apologist or, as you just said, fans who can't let go of that part of their life or their personality. Let me reiterate again: this is not to defend Robert Kraft, who I've ripped recently at the owners' meetings, ripped for trying to play it both ways, ripped for not taking enough credit or blame. For things that have transpired in very recent years. It's to say, for you to ask an everyday person, how many people would you trust to deliver accurately a third hand account from your perspective and someone else's perspective in a matter where you and that other person don't get along? Okay, that you both have confidence. And then there's a person in the middle who can then tell somebody else, oh, and that person is a former boss. So now, I want to read from the story again to kind of wrap this up, and then I want to ask you a percentage that you believe of this part of the story, because again, this is I use the word flimsy. I'll stand by it. I think as far as the sourcing goes, that allows for more interpretation. Quote: multiple sources said that Kraft spoke with some candor to blank about Belichick, though the sources declined to elaborate. One source close to Belichick said Kraft was a big part of why the Falcons passed in hiring him. That's a source close to Belichick said Kraft was a big part of why the Falcons passed on him. We will get to that part in a second. Yada, yada, further down. Quote: Kraft's comments were consistent with what he had been telling confidants for months. This is about Belichick not being trustworthy. After an unprecedented run, after Spygate and Aaron Hernandez, after backing his coach and moving on from Brady, after disagreements public, cash the Krafts were willing to spend, and private leaking against each other through the media, the owner had lost trust in Belichick, which was a key reason for their deteriorating working relationship and the end of the Patriot way. A second source close to Kraft said, quote, Kraft found Bill to be extremely difficult and obstinate and kind of stubborn, and in the end, not worthy of his trust, and also very, very, very arrogant. So even if you want to disagree with this and think, oh, it's BS and ESPN, you're doing the same thing everyone was doing in 2017, saying ESPN is a sham, yada yada. Granted, it was all turned out to be true. You have to acknowledge that this falls in line with everything we've come to learn over the last 6 months about how Robert and Bill feel about each other and have acted towards each other privately and publicly as described in that quote. So what do you make of that? And then again, your percentage of, I believe this X amount. I'm willing to buy in 80%, 60%, 90%.
So I believe I'll start there. I believe the bulk of it, like more than 50%. It's more likely than not the bulk of this is true. Like, to use the words that we're used to in a
Yeah.
different world of Patriot scandal. Because I think we've seen the tone and we've seen Robert call Bill a schmuck. We've seen Robert call him an a-hole, but he's my a-hole. He's hard to get along with. We've all heard stories about Jonathan butting heads with Bill over the years, even though in this story it claims Jonathan saved his job after the 2022 season, which
We are going to get to that, believe me.
I thought that was an interesting nugget. But I generally, it's where I started. I think these stories validate generally what we've seen, heard, couldn't necessarily hear secondhand, which maybe is becoming more and more acceptable if it's heard secondhand. If you have a source telling you what another source said now,
Or third
apparently,
hand now, yeah.
yeah, or third hand, yes. Can I ask you a quick journalism question too
Yeah.
on the aside here? So there's various sources, unnamed, this person close to Belichick. At one point, someone is referred to as a former Patriots assistant. Is it ethical and journalistically accepted to change the descriptor in a way that isn't obvious? So, for example, is a source close to Belichick and a former Patriot assistant quoted different points in the story? Is it okay if that's the same person?
So technically that would be true, right? What I would then ask is, why are you changing the label for that person? How you identify that person? Is it strictly to protect them and that they're relaying information that if you put together, say in both instances, an ex-Patriots assistant said this, an ex-Patriots assistant said that. Well, the Venn diagram of people who know those two things is really just one person. You go, I can't have him exposed. He trusted me with this. Then I would say that is okay. I would only say that is okay, though, under those circumstances. If you are just changing the name of the source from a person close to Bill and then an ex assistant for the sake of trying to make it sound like, and I'm not accusing them of this whatsoever. You asked a general journalism question, it's a
Yes.
general journalism answer. If you are doing that just to make it sound like you have a wider breadth of sources and information, no, hell no. Then you
Okay.
are doing it for selfish purposes, only to protect the source. I would argue again, if you and you would have to run this up an editor. Like I have written
Right.
these pieces with Doug Hyde, with Karen Garrig, and Karen has been invaluable to my career. The reporting, how I go about things, just would not be here without her. Full stop. And that story that I did with Doug would not have been what it was without him, or if I'd done it myself, or he had done it himself. But areas like that you were talking about, we talk it out and go, okay, why do we want to do this? And if it's anything other than protecting your source or getting to the more accurate truth, then no, like because
I
that
agree.
those, as I said at the outset, that is the job.
Because you're misleading. You're
Right.
intentionally misleading the reader, I believe. To give another example, I think there was some of that in the dynasty. The players complaining about I sat for 55 minutes and said positive things and really praised the Patriot way, and then for 2 minutes may
Yep.
have acknowledged some negatives and some stresses, and that's all that made it. I immediately, when watching with my wife and talking to her, I was like, you have to acknowledge that as the reporter. Like
Mhm.
we all would do it in a certain sense. Like if we're all writing a feature on somebody and they're, oh, boring. They grew up, they had parents, the parents loved them, they pushed them hard, like blah, 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 blah. And then a good hook comes that's like, oh, and then my dad murdered somebody. And it's like, Jiminy Christmas. This is a bad example, but yeah, you're going to utilize that because we all want to be read. And it is. We're passing along the most interesting things, but you can't discount the 55 minutes that were said. You can't just ignore the rest of the story, to steal the famous line from the radio. Like that's all part of it. Like, and I feel like I wonder. I'm just going to
Let's
be
stay there
honest.
for a second because you called it a bad example. I think it's actually a great example. As evil as that is, your dad murdering someone because that's a significant rare event. It's going to form you in a way that's probably traumatic. But also, I would say this because people are going to agree with you. Like people are intentionally pulling your things out to tell a story. It's your agenda. It's your narrative, which is a word. I don't know about you. If I could shoot one word into the sun, never to be seen again, never to be written again, never to be heard again, it would be narrative. It has been
Yep.
overused. People don't know what it is. But
Right.
their point would be you're being selective. To which my answer would be yes, of course we are. If we were to tell the exact story of, again, I said this in the podcast, I'm doing a profile of Elliot Wolf, of every second of that 42-year-old man's life, it would take up every paper, all 40 pages, all 50 pages for weeks. And that story would not be worth reading. It would take too much time. The return on that investment, you have to make choices, which is going to come with opportunity cost and stuff left on the floor. If someone was telling the story of your life, do you want to know about what you got at a math quiz in the second semester of sixth grade? No, it doesn't matter. And the choices fall on us, which is both a blessing and that we have the privilege to do that, and a curse in that you understand I'm trying to get as representative of a story, a meaningful one as possible, understanding it's not going to be perfect. But like the idea that, you can write a story without making choices is just, it's impossible. You don't understand. So you gave a good example, even though it was evil, obviously.
And that's where the track record and trust of a reporter comes in.
Yeah.
And not to take shots, but we all, I'm sure, have either. I mean, Jeff Benedict. I think if Jeff Benedict comes out with another 10-part series on, let's just say, Wayne Gretzky, I think New England fans will go, well, is this the truth? Or because I knew what they kind of manipulated from my team, because I knew enough information about my team. I don't know Wayne Gretzky. I think people might go into it with a skeptical eye. And you're right. That's the responsibility, the burden, whatever you want to call it as a reporter. I do it. I mean, with our friend slash frenemy, Ian Rappaport. Like, I know when he screws stuff up with the Patriots or misrepresents things. And therefore, I pause every time there's a story from him just because I say, I don't know the Seattle Seahawks. And you're giving me seemingly really interesting information there, but I need to pause and make sure I should really trust that information. And that's where you begin to just trust or build track records with your sources. That's where we get back to the ESPN story. Seth
Look at
Wickersham.
you.
I
Transition.
mean,
Yes. We were starting to lose some listeners who are we have a lot of newborn dads who listen to this podcast, I guess. I think they might have been dozing off. Anyone doing the lawn just veered and has now had an angle. They have to go back. Or if they're
yep.
grocery shopping, they missed an item. So we're gonna pull them back right here. Murder No. Robert Kraft. What does this say about Robert Kraft? When I agree with you, I don't know what percentage you landed on. I'm going to go 75% to 80 because again, it falls in line with Robert had been telling people privately for months before this happened. If he's a close friend, you're going to be honest with a friend. And Robert obviously was not happy with how things ended with Bill. And Bill can't be a pain in the ass. Like we don't have to
Yeah.
pretend the guy is gone. We don't have to, eulogize someone. And we all say that only the nice things, the good things about someone after they pass. Bill's past, his career here as a head coach has passed. We all understood who he was. You couldn't separate, the greatness, the genius that everything went into the greatest dynasty in NFL history is a guy who was also kind of a grump. Don't take it from me. Take it from his players and maybe the owner, maybe not. But I agree. Are you in the same neighborhood, 75, 80%?
Yeah, I was gonna say about 70%, somewhere
Okay.
in there, like some of the details, whatever, but the general tone of this, yeah, I believe because we have a knowledge, and B, as I said, I have a trust for ESPN, Seth Wickersham, Venata, their sources, and their track record.
The degree to which, the 20 to 25%, right? Like we have to explain why it's not 100, or I feel compelled to, is how much of this was exaggerated. If Robert just said, and this is included in the story, I yada yada it, was you're never going to have a warm conversation with him. Okay, well, who cares? Like,
Right.
you're not hiring him to be your therapist. You're hiring Belichick to win football games. And Parcells had told that, also in the story, to Kraft in 1996 when Kraft said, okay, well, I want to hire Bill. I want to promote him. And so he was scared off a little bit by that. And then came around and realized, okay, I can lick lollipops and watch TV with Pete Carroll, but we're not going to win as many games. I would rather sit alone and pass this guy in the hallway and have him not say hi to me if on the scoreboard on Sundays we have more points than the other team. And that's what he did. So, like, I think the part about maybe the character, probably, if I had to guess, just underscore guess, not reporting right now, is exaggerated. And that's where I have my doubts about 20 to 25%. In addition to why this might also not have benefited Kraft, as you said, not just that if the Falcons stink, it's good business for the Patriots. If the Falcons took Belichick off his hands, that saves him $25 million, which would have been offset from the money the Patriots owed Belichick and wouldn't have if he had landed another job, which, as you said, he seemed to expect at least on January 11th.
And that's where I get back to some of this is how you feel about Robert Kraft, his character, his way of doing business. And if he and blank are as close as we seem to believe they are, the story indicates they are, I think he wants to be a supportive friend. I think he leans on allies, and I think if this ally is leaning on him, he doesn't want to burn his ally, right? He wants to be truthful with this good friend. I also think from Robert's perspective, one of the things is always he wants to be liked. He wants to look like he came out on top in all circles. I firmly believe, like business, community, team, locker room, players. Like he wants to be genuinely liked by pretty much everyone, which we all know is sort of a impossible endeavor. Like I don't know that you
Mhm.
can ever achieve that, but certainly for a friend, my takeaway would be he gave an honest assessment to a friend. And that now it's also interesting. Did that truly sway the decision? Because I don't know if blank shared this with his underlings, his executives, right? And the executives just flat out, I think it says voted Bill off the island was one of like the phrases they
Yeah.
used, but like they voted for a 1, a 2, a 3. Mike McDonald, I think, was higher than Bill. Raheem Morris was higher than Bill. Like what they weren't considering Bill. And it would be, therefore, it becomes an easy decision, right? If Robert Kraft tells me, I'm not sure this guy's trustworthy, and then all of the people I trust with my team right below me, my executive staff say, these are the best options. Belichick's not one of them. Doesn't that go, well, the decision's been made. There's nothing pointing to Bill.
I completely agree. I just want to stand Robert for one quick second because what you said about, they obviously want to be liked. We've all talked about that. I think fans can see that. But the idea that they reach out and lean heavily on their friends. Like once you are a Kraft person, you're a Kraft person. And I know this, again, from being around the team, certainly have not covered them as long as you have and the network you have. But, in this piece about Elliott coming out next week, I know there were people that they consulted about him who don't really know Elliott that well, but the Crafts know them. They trust them. And so even though I'm not going to my plumber to ask like, "Hey, what would you recommend, my next internet provider to be or do you know a guy?" But if I love my plumber, I'm just going to ask him anyway. That's what they
Right.
have done here in that part. And I will say this. What does it say about Robert? So either he's too naive, and oblivious to what he was doing. He was speaking honestly, like you suggested. It was just a frank conversation, friend to friend, businessman to businessman, and didn't realize the downside of this getting out, as it since has, if it indeed happened. And he also didn't realize that he could have saved himself 25 million bucks. And he's rich enough to not care about 25 million bucks. But again, I think it seems like he accepted Bill was going to coach elsewhere. And if this was the one job he had left, you would think he would encourage Arthur to take him. The other part about this is this: if this was not the case, and he did this out of malice, he wasn't naive, and you don't buy this, and he wasn't oblivious, that he was far too motivated by this pettiness, this grudge, some of the things he hated about Bill, and couldn't get out of his own damn way. Because Robert has wanted this both ways for too long, right? As the fan in the stands, I've got my fan hat on. I was at Old Foxborough Stadium, but he doesn't want to be that behind closed doors. He wants to be the ruthless businessman. He's the guy who lords over everything. He got Belichick out. He foisted the blame on Brady for Brady's own exit, even though that was Belichick pushing him out the door and Robert holding it for him as it happened. If he wanted to shut that and keep Brady, he could have. He did not, but we didn't pin the blame on him. He wants it both ways. And so I think it says a guy who's either out of touch or someone who put trust in the wrong people. And at this point, it doesn't seem very salvageable. So I don't know if you have anything more about that.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is more a Blank thing. I think it's kind of a weird call for Blank to make in a certain sense. Like he just canned the coach that he was with for a quarter of a century. Like obviously he has some negative feelings toward him. He has or he wouldn't have canned him. So it's almost like a too close, too soon situation there. And then the Robert thing, I think we also acknowledged it we don't have to beat the dead horse and go down. Like he's getting older and there's going to be a transition of power. And as you said, it might be time to really um, assess that. Like I feel the same way about Jerry Jones. When I look at Jerry Jones and I hear him speak, he's always been a little bit weird, but now it feels like old and weird. And
Did you see the notebook at the owners' meetings that got tweeted out?
no,
So he was just to pivot really quickly. He is sitting in a chair in this long hallway that I had passed at the owners' meetings, this extravagant Ritz-Carlton hotel connected to a JW, surrounded by Cowboys reporters. And he's explaining how the Cowboys are about to go all in. Mind you, Dallas, which has spent virtually nothing in free agency. Like you were mad
right.
about the Patriots free agency. Go take a look at what Dallas didn't do over the last month and a half. And he's drawing like hieroglyphics. Like there's angles over here, there are circles over there, there's a square over in the corner that explain nothing. And the Cowboys reporters just tweet a picture being like, so this is why they're all in, but not really. And you can't make out anything of it. To your point about like, what is the man doing? What is he saying? What is he drawing? This makes no sense.
Lost touch. And without getting political, I know there's some people that feel the same way about our country right now, right? There is a man in office running this country that people are like, I'm not sure that guy really has it all together and should still be running a country, a business. And yet these people have earned this position that they're in, whether it's Joe Biden or Jerry Jones or Robert Kraft. Robert
Or your
Kraft,
boss at home. Like everyone looks and says, like, oh, if I
right,
had their job, I could do better.
right.
One last thing on this, because you hit, a really important point here, which okay, what is the consequence of this? What does it matter? Why are we really talking about this aside from the soap opera element of it? The biggest mistake I think Kraft has made in the last few months, and the dynasty was years in the works. They were talking about it with players and coaches, and it was their project. That's how it was known in the building when they're doing these interviews again, well before it finally came out, is being a little too proactive in burying Bill. And because Bill, in the end, dug his own grave, 29 and 39 over the last 4 years. The Brady thing we've covered. You've had players this offseason come out and say, it was time. Matt Judon said that. Kendrick Bourne said that. Forget what all the media did, which, by the way, people who think the media drove Bill out of town, don't you think first we would have not drafted N'Keal Harry or maybe signed DeAndre Hopkins if we had that power? Like, come
Yeah.
on.
I wish I
Or
had
spend
that
a little
power.
bit of money. Yeah, and we would have made a million bad, dumb signings and trades. But the point is, Robert just had to stand back and let it happen. Everyone saw what a disaster it was in Germany, getting kicked off Monday Night Football, getting shut out, losing these games where they allowed 10 or fewer points in 3 straight games and lost all of them. Okay. Everyone knew it was time, even the people who wanted to argue against Bill. All this has done is fuel the fire on the other side. And now they've been burned by it. So that's it. But you don't seem to think it mattered because none of the people under Arthur Blank had Bill in their top 3 at the end of the search.
Right, and I think I'll go back to that line. If he was 63, I think this would be an entirely different discussion, and this is sort of explained at various points in the story, this idea of if you bring Belichick in, what are you bringing in? What is he doing? There were plenty of references to, well, he's basically looking to win 15 games and get the hell out of Dodge, get his record and end it, and that is just not something I think many owners are looking to latch onto. And then you layer in all the other stuff of the culture and the Joe Judge, Matt Patricia decisions and like all these others. But I would say, even if he were more successful of late, there has to be a pause to hiring a 72-year-old coach who you think you're only getting for 2 years, who's a dictator. Like, we just take the positive. He was a dictator who succeeded. He's still pretty good, and he's 72. Well, but am I changing everything for that guy to then just leave me? It's like, you have a fling and you get divorced, and then the fling moves on, and you're like, oh, I probably shouldn't have done that. Now I don't have a wife or a girlfriend. That's what this is.
We've had a lot of these X analogies. Andy, I'm worried for you in the household. Is everything
I'm good.
okay?
Nope, I'm good. I
You're
think, as
good.
far as I
Good,
know.
good man. Well, inspired me to make a similar analogy, right? When Arthur calls Robert, it's like, hey, you just went through this divorce. What do you think your ex-wife of 24
Right.
years? Do you mind if I pick her up? What do you think is going to be said on the other end of that phone? But
Yeah.
I'm with you. We don't have to spend much time on this because Atlanta made its decision now almost 3 months ago, right? They didn't go with Belichick. They picked Raheem Morris, who again was hired and supposedly blindsided Belichick, which I completely believe because again, this is someone who has been told and has the numbers to back it up and the trophies and the rings that he is the greatest of all time. When you live and work and breathe in that type of air for so long, it's intoxicating. Of course it would be. Of course it should be. The man thinks he was going to get the job because he did well in that first interview. Less so because again, Fontenot, Greg Beatles, and Rich Piquet were like, this is not for me. Why would they? Because they might get fired or lose power no matter what Bill was going to say. But this is a part of the story I'm going to take issue with because I said it earlier and I said I'd get back to it. Here it is.
Okay.
One source close to Belichick said Kraft was, quote, a big part of why the Falcons passed on hiring him. It's not that I don't care about what a source close to Belichick thinks about why the Falcons did what they did. It's just that I don't find any commentary from them who were not in the building, who were not in those discussions, has to say about it. Because this person in Belichick's inner circle not only has earned his trust, but surely given all of their trust to him. So they're going to believe what he believed. And what he believed was dead wrong. So why do
Yep.
we get these quotes about asked whether Kraft had any motivation to keep Belichick off the sideline? A source close to the coach, to Belichick, said, well, if Bill goes on to have success and Tom already had success, then who does Kraft blame? Why do I care about what they think? Of course they're upset. It's the same thing if you have Kraft about how do you think Belichick interviewed in Atlanta? At least he might have, though, had a conversation with Arthur Blank. In this instance, we have no reason to believe Atlanta told Bill, hey, yeah, we didn't hire you and it was all Robert's fault. But thanks for coming in. Click. Like, I don't care what they think. They were not involved in that at all, but it's in the story left and right.
Yeah, I don't that bothered me as well because this felt like axe to grind territory, and they may not even intentionally know. So this source is taking Bill. Well, Bill knew so much that Bill thought he was getting the job until he found out the job went to somebody else. So Bill didn't really know what was going on, and now Bill's telling his source, who's then telling the reporters, and it's like, another bad analogy, I guess, like the high school athlete who's not playing and then asking the mother why he's not playing. Well, yeah, the mother probably doesn't really know. She knows why her kid thinks it, and she has her biased view, but it's such a one-sided view that it really adds nothing. If anything, that's an area where if I were like a Patriot fan or somebody wanting to rip the credibility of this story, I think that's an area where you would point to and say, why are you putting this in there? How do you feel good about putting this in there and adding value or actual truthful insight? That would be something that I would circle if I were doing that.
You're on fire, dude. I'm not gonna lie. That
Okay.
that analogy was so on point. That did not
Well,
involve you
thank you.
getting divorced or cheated on. I loved it so much more than the other ones, and it was well done. You brought up Robert's legacy and just what? Hey, why are we doing this? Can we stop? Can we please? Can we just cut it out? We don't have to get along. You just have to shut up, and
Yeah.
especially to reporters. How damaging do you think, not just this story, because again, I think this is going to blow over. Friday, if you're doing a show or I'm doing a show, like we'll talk about something else and we'll move on. The draft will be here. But the last 6 months, maybe 8 months from when Robert's coming out and said, I like our position. I don't care we're projected in fourth place. We've got this underdog mentality. How much from that time until now do you think everything that's transpired has damaged his legacy or maybe upside as a Hall of Famer?
I don't personally think a ton is done. I think we fixate on these things in the the present and this like flash mass media world we live in. But I'm generally a believer. It's like Belichick and Brady, and, with the scandals, Deflategate and Spygate. In the time, you're like, oh, this is going to be the first thing in their obituary. And like, no, they're not. Because I generally believe as a society, we remember positives and accomplishments, and we want to. We just flat out want to. We want to promote people and embellish people. And you said it, eulogize them and forget that the guy was an a-hole. Like that does no, never do you go to one of those where they're like, the guy was kind of an a-hole, if we're being honest. No one does that. So I actually don't think there's a ton of damage being done other than potentially the relationship, the triangle. Like if you, I don't, even that I think gets fixed because I mean, there was nothing icier than Parcells and Belichick, and they have buried that hatchet. They've kind of come around. I don't know if age has to do with that and, mortality. But I would say that would be my one question is if you're a Patriots fan and you dream of, 2026, a panel at Gillette Stadium with Belichick, Kraft, and Brady. I don't know where that lies right now, but in terms of just their legacies and their greatness, I think these are minor blips that will be forgotten and buried.
Look, this is the reporter hat off, journalist hat, notebook, all stats aside. I hope so, man. Like you think about all the good that was done, the memories forged, the small economy built around Foxborough, the legacy, just the identity, the sports identity of this region, with all that Robert and Bill and Tom did. That should outweigh I was going to say almost everything but murder, but that actually happened. Pretty much everything else. You know what I mean? Like you would hope. I don't need a kumbaya. You just need a panel at some point. And so what I would say is this: I largely agree with you, and the point about memory is a good one. What I would say though is that because this comes so close to the end of what will be Robert's ownership, and maybe he passes it on to Jonathan, and I hope he lives as long and as happy as possible. It goes for everyone. But I'm curious if this might push back a couple years when he does get into the Hall of Fame and any of that panel, right? Like this article just made it harder to make a case for Robert to get in, and which is strange, right? Like the rings are there. Nothing's going to change about the Super Bowls, the success, the winning, the new CBAs, all the money that's been ushered in when he's negotiating these tough deals with the TV networks, which has changed the NFL. But the perception as it relates to the media, which has been ingesting this all with the fans, when they go to vote and make a case for the one coach slash contributor, it's harder to do for a guy who's making so many headlines for the wrong way that it'll just be like, well, he's not going anywhere. We'll just wait. We'll do it another year. And
Right.
I hope he gets in while he's still with us. And I don't mean to be dark about this. It's just a fact for a guy who's in his mid 80s, and has a Hall of Fame resume. But I just feel like we remember the beginning, we remember the end, and the end, as for the last 6 months, has not been good for Robert Kraft. How much time you got left? We've gone way longer than I expected, and you've been awesome. So I don't want to take up too much time.
No, I got a few more minutes.
Okay,
Cadlick can
excellent.
wait. I'll record with Cadlick later.
Yes, sir. We'll make him wait. He's been on the show already. Just tell him to, take a second. Okay. Belichick. Let's just stick with the stuff as it pertains to his future. This is one quote I thought was interesting, and it's really the one name in here. I'm going to see if you can guess the one name that sticks out to me in this quote from the story. The executives also were concerned about the staff Belichick would bring with him, including assistants who had worked with him in New England and who had struggled on their own. Josh McDaniels, Joe Judge, Jack Easterby, Matt Patricia. At one point, Blank asked Belichick why his charges had failed elsewhere. Belichick replied that he thought they were better soldiers than generals. First of all, that's ice cold and
Yeah.
probably straight to it. Second of all, if I'm reading that as Josh or Joe or Jack or Matt, I'm like, okay, man. Like, I'm buried. I just got fired from the Raiders or let go by the Eagles, or I'm now down at Ole Miss hanging out with Lane Kiffin because no one else will have me. I'm Joe Judge and Jack Easterby's got nowhere. But which one of those names sticks out to me, do you think?
Jack Easterby.
Yes,
Um,
sir. Go on.
by far, because it felt like we had kind of moved on from that era, and I didn't necessarily include him in the Belichick inner circle still of, Belichick guys. And you're right. There was a lot said in there. Because elsewhere in this story, when it says Bill will be interested in any job in the Northeast, so his close assistants would be able to join him. You mean the guys who you just said are not good leaders, like the guys you just kind of sold out in a national headline here? You want to make sure you can get them with Philly or Washington or New York, because I wouldn't feel great about that if I were those guys. But yeah, Jack Easterby, I first of all, I'm not sure I ever understood the tenure of Jack Easterby in New England. I'll be honest with you on that. That's one guy I never really had my finger on, and where he went on to with Houston and the role he had. Like the guy in the sweatpants who high-fived guys in the locker room is suddenly running another NFL franchise. And like, how did we get here? And then those weird clips that I'm sure everybody has seen with him, like at those telling jokes and accents, and like he's a bad stand-up comedian. And he is one of the most, Aaron Hernandez would get all the attention for obvious reasons. Jack Easterby might be, behind Aaron Hernandez, as the second most interesting and curious figure of the dynasty in New England in the Bill Belichick era.
So in a positive light, Ernie Adams is ahead of him. Still, I would argue, because
Yeah,
I
but
don't know
he's
if you
been out
listened.
there. He's been out there now. He was on the dynasty. And if you listen to that podcast, and by the way, you
So
talk
good.
about dads losing interest in podcasts. I listened to all 2 hours and 48 minutes. We really could have cut that Julian Edelman podcast with Ernie Adams down to about 32 minutes.
What a king, though. King Ernie, finally letting loose, telling stories. I get it. There's a lot of fluff in there, but yeah, he's a man of mystery. But let's talk about Easterby quickly, and then I want to know whether you think Bill is going to be an NFL head coach again, because again, this is what matters, right? Like, it's April, it's silly season. This is a real story, but Bill's never coming back to coach in New England. So like the fact that Robert is not doing right by him, or
Right.
bad mouthing him allegedly, doesn't really matter because he's not coming back. Um, Jack Easterby stuck out to me because when you make a list of assistants who would reunite with Bill, and some of us did this, right, when the Atlanta rumors were going on, he was nowhere on those lists. And these are, again, very plugged in reporters who have reported on Belichick and the Patriots for years. Jack Easterby, as far as I know. And you saw it go from character coach, team chaplain, to character coach, then to running the Texans and helping get Bill O'Brien ousted. This power hungry, a ladder climbing guy who earned the nickname, crap, I can't remember the Game of Thrones character, but it led to Sports Illustrated story that led to his takedown. I'm gonna look this up. This is gonna bug the crap out of me. Did you watch Game of Thrones?
I did not, so I
God.
can't help.
Anyway, what is he doing now back in the picture? Why does he get mentioned here? Why does Bill feel compelled to bring him along? And maybe it was just a part of the selection process where we just talked about. You have to make decisions in these stories. You cannot include every detail about every single thing. Otherwise, you don't have a story. You just have the longest record that no one's ever going to read. But for him to be included with those other names that are obvious coordinators, and then I think about people who had have access to and the trust of the Crafts, as well as Belichick, and is known. I just had the name again from Game of Thrones. I'm interrupting my own role, but his potential role in this has me a little curious. I don't know about Littlefinger. Littlefinger, which is doing nothing for you. You're nodding along because you're being a very patient guest.
Yep.
But it fits what Jack Easterby was in Houston. And that's according to people who worked there, played there, coached there, etc. I just wonder about that. And I'm going to let everyone else do the wondering from here on out because I have my journalist cap back on. But are you curious about his inclusion in this story?
Absolutely. I mean, it jumped off the page because I did not expect, because obviously Matt Patricia, Josh McDaniels, like those are some obvious ones that you're like, yeah, they've kind of flamed out as head coaches. Bill himself says they're not generals, they're soldiers, or whatever the quote was in here. Like they'll follow Bill, run through a wall, develop. But Jack Easterby, and the flip side of that is, if I'm blank and I read this, I go, wait, that guy was going to bring Jack Easterby to my organization? Boy, am I really glad I didn't hire that guy. Like that would fall in line with recent questionable decisions, in my opinion, that Bill Belichick makes. And just tying this all together real quick, because I know we are going long. People always say that on podcasts and then they keep talking, even though they're going long, that Bill Belichick, and you said it earlier, Robert Kraft trusts people and reaches out to people, and those connections and loyalty is big to him. Isn't that the same with Bill? He has his
Yes.
dependables, he calls them.
Yes.
I just didn't know that Jack Easterby was a dependable. I thought maybe he was more of an expendable, like he served a certain purpose for a certain time, and then, that kind of grew into something I couldn't control anymore. Get the hell out of here. Maybe he's more of a dependable than I ever really realized.
I agree. And I don't know that for a fact. I want this to stay here and in this discussion, which isn't to say that I'm not being fully honest and open. It's just this is where my knowledge stops. I covered one season when Jack Easterby was here. Then he left. He and I never had any interactions. But when you read, you understand, you talk to other people about what he's like, what he did. And we all saw it in Houston. For him now to be back in the picture at a time when, there's some shady business to be done, whether it was Bill's exit or what's happened since with the PR, his name in here caught my eye. Okay, yes or no? Bill is an NFL head coach again.
Yes.
Where?
Dallas, October.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's because I don't think it's actually good for him to make it to next hiring cycle. I think that lessens the opportunity. I think his best opportunity is in season to Dallas, where he will be forced to show up with a suitcase, coach the team he has, throw a staff together. There can't be long discussions about power and structure and contracts or it's show up. Maybe it's a bye week. So show up, and in 13 days, I need you to take urines and beat theirins and just show that you are still a great coach at Hart. So I actually think that's the best case scenario for him. I think that's the best case scenario for the Cowboys because I think Mike McCarthy's a boob and they're going to flounder. And as you mentioned, their talent is getting worse, not better, and they got issues there. So yeah, I actually bet Rich Keefe a pizza on this that by mid-season, Bill Belichick will be the head coach of the Cowboys.
Wow. That's a good bet. I probably would have taken that bet, but I am also on the record saying I agree because his best bet is to get in midseason, have some proof of concept still at 72, and do what he does best, which is coach. And that's a talented enough team. He's going to take all offseason to study these teams and their upcoming opponents and be as prepared as he would be for another Patriots season. And part of that is the draft. That's why he's staying in the game. It's not only just the media aspect
Right.
and raising his Q rating. It's to be able to know everything about the players that he may need to know, as you said, by October, maybe November. The question for me is, and maybe this goes out the window for someone who is a ruthless pragmatist, but his respect and understanding of the profession and people like Mike McCarthy, who are also lifers, and to think what his presence and the rumors and this news would do to him and his family and his job security. Mike McCarthy is a lame duck coach. They just hired a lame duck defensive coordinator, Mike Zimmer, someone I know he has respect for.
Yep.
Bill is on the record saying, I've stolen stuff from him. And Zimmer's like, yeah, I hope that's real. I hope he's being genuine. Does he care? Does he not? I don't think we can know, we can answer. But that's something that I think in his soul, his football soul at least, like you have to consider because he knows what that's going to do to them reading these headlines in big markets like Dallas, even New York with Brian Dable, somebody cares about too. That I might be coming from their jobs because that's something no one wants to live with.
And he won't want to accept this. He doesn't control that, right? Because he doesn't control idiots on podcasts and he doesn't control bloggers and tweets and just fans and social media. And the reality is Bill Belichick's a free agent head coach. The reality is it's a terrible profession if you want security and comfort and niceties and all those things. And there's no favors done to Mike McCarthy with no contract, right? Like, I mean, he's a lame duck coach, right? That phrase has been around forever in so many jobs and sports and things. So, and I also don't know his personal relationship, how much respect he has for Mike McCarthy, because I can tell you over the years, discussions with Bill on the record, off the record, you pick up there's certain coaches he doesn't really respect and doesn't really give a rat's ass about. And if Mike McCarthy's one of those, maybe he's more comfortable just swooping in.
Mike McCarthy's beaten him last season, 23, beat him in 21. I'm trying to think. They lost in 18 with the Packers. Before that, beat them in 14 in Green Bay. Like I think there's a respect there. I mean, Mike McCarthy is a poor in-game manager. I think his offense is static. He's very much an old school, like few of the West Coast guys left in the league, true West Coast. But it's interesting because also, you say he can't really influence that. He officially declined comment for the story. I would be surprised if there were not other people who were contacted close to him, who were cited multiple times in the story, who did not go to him first about what they should say, what they should not, given how tight that circle is, and if he did not have some influence from a distance, which is all I'll say. Okay.
Well, just real quick, my favorite part of the story was actually in one of the places where they say who turned down the opportunity to comment, and then the very next return paragraph, Mike Lombardi is quoted. You can always count on Lombardi not to turn down people for
Yeah,
comments. He's
yeah.
always ready to comment.
Ready on Twitter stories elsewhere. And
Everywhere.
Stacey
Yep.
James putting his name to this too, which was interesting.
Yes.
Usually just team spokesman.
Yep.
Said Robert, which I feel like I really should have included this, but I'll dig it up now so it's on the record, and I think people know this by now that they're listening to the podcast. But let's make it clear. Granted, perhaps too late. Stacey James, team PR, vice president of communications, vehemently denied, Robert steadfastly denied ever speaking ill. Belichick said he endorsed him. That's something Arthur Blank said at the Super Bowl, that Robert Kraft endorsed Bill Belichick for the job. And he, again, stressed that they mutually parted ways, which we can all debate about, but it's an official denial, that I think deserves to be read. And here I
Yep.
am, still stammering, buying myself some time. And here we are. I finally found the quote. Robert steadfastly denies saying anything negative to Arthur Blank about Bill Belichick after Robert and Bill mutually agreed to part ways. In fact, Robert advocated for Bill to get the job. He acknowledged that, Robert might have complained about Bill to Arthur because, again, they're friends in the
Yeah.
past. Quote from Stacey James: "It would not surprise me to learn that owners sometimes lament to those close to them when their teams are struggling, but Robert Kraft never questioned Bill's character or trust when talking to Arthur Blank. Trust is important to Robert. He wouldn't have employed Coach Belichick for the past 24 years if he ever questioned his trust." And a Falcons spokesperson, declined to comment and referred to Blank's comments that I mentioned at the Super Bowl, where he said, "Look, Robert endorsed him. He loved his interview. We just went in a different direction." Last thing, do you have any leftover thoughts here? Or do you want to give us your lingering draft thoughts, which was the original homework, original tenet of this podcast, but we had to pivot.
So, other than my obvious, as you noted earlier, hashtag take Drake, I'm a
Take Drake.
maniac. I want to see Drake May. Let's go chalk. All the local reporters seem to have landed on Drake May. Makes a lot of sense. The mock drafts are falling in line. It seems like it's now Adam Schefter is all in on Jaden Daniels. Buy your jerseys if you're a Commanders fan for him. And so that would mean Drake May's available. The one thing I've thrown out of late is a fun little this idea that maybe the Patriots' interest in J.J. McCarthy is to drive a trade market to maybe entice a team like the Vikings into making a deal that they're not quite yet ready to make. So my new dream scenario, dream like Sunday with a cherry on top scenario, is the Patriots trade out of 3 with the Vikings. They get 11, 23, next year's 1, and Christian Darrisaw, a left tackle, to fill a massive void on their depth chart. The Vikings take J.J. McCarthy at 3, which everybody goes, ah. And then the Patriots trade it back into either 4 or 5 with the Cardinals or Chargers to take Drake May. And exactly how the trade works out, I don't know all the values and the needs and the quarterbacks, but I'm okay if I then just give back 11, 23 in next year's Vikings 1 to get Drake May at 4 or 5, because now I got my quarterback and my left tackle. And when I pick at 34, I can just take a receiver. And by the first few minutes of day 2, I can pull a Mike Ditka and go golfing because I filled my 3 major needs on the weekend.
To still steal from Simmons, the Podfather, that gave me a trade gasm. That was fantastic. I love that idea. Take Drake and take your time. There's a shit ton of risk baked into that proposal.
Oh,
The
God,
Giants come up, go from 6 as opposed to 11, then you have to worry about that. Really, really need to get the best of Monty Ossenfort, who we saw on Twitter a week ago. And this is obviously, not cut. This is not an agenda driven by the team. The man can cook on the telephone come draft time, as we saw from behind the scenes video the team had when the Cardinals traded out from 2 or 3 last. I think it was 3, back up to 6, and all this wheeling and dealing. But look, you get a franchise left tackle and you get a franchise quarterback, and that's before the first round is even at pick 10. Like, yes, I'm all in. Any guys that you're higher on than consensus that we all talk about Jordan Morgan and we talk about Lad McConkey or Ricky Pearsall or Javon Baker, like anyone else aside from like not the obvious, but day 2, day 3 guys?
So there's a couple things I'd say in that area. In general, I think we're sleeping on the cornerback position a little bit. I think we're also fixated on offense because we cut Christian Gonzalez a year ago, who I like to say very matter-of-factly and not try to alter the narrative, was so dominant in the 3.5 games he played that he's now just a foregone conclusion as basically the second coming of Mike Haynes.
Thank you. Yes.
And behind him, you don't have it seems like a lot of slot corners, some of whom may have to play on the outside. You lose a guy like Miles Bryant, who was a Swiss Army knife in the back end for you. Jack Jones obviously is long gone. JC Jackson is kind of gone. Who knows? Rumblings. Could he be back? I know, whatever. But I think there is another year of house of cards at the cornerback position. So as much as we fixate on offense, and I hear a lot of people quarterback, tackle, and 2 receivers, that's where like I want the first 4 picks to go. It wouldn't stun me or even irritate me if there was a cornerback thrown in there. And then a couple names that I fell in love with. Hart, you put the little I Hart. Tyrone Tracy. I don't know if you watched him at all. He is an Iowa receiver turned Purdue running back who's been in college for like 6 years, undersized. I think this team needs football players and playmakers and just fun athletes. He's a guy that I'm not sure whether he'd be a slot receiver, a third down running back, a future Tyrone Montgomery type, jack of all trades. But just, and the tie into Iowa, really, like, he feels like a Patriot athlete, versatile guy. And then you tie it into Iowa and that institutional connection and knowledge. Just feel like a guy to watch. And then I also think running back is a sneaky need to get a backup running back to kind of have in the pipeline, even though I think they want to re-sign Ramondre Stevenson. I still think you need another guy. Ray Davis out of Kentucky is a guy that I really liked, and I feel like he's a little under talked about, but I know the running back is always a weird, not going to have one in the first round. How valuable is it? Well, in free agency, it seemed valuable. There were a bunch of them changing teams. So those are a couple guys that I kind of like.
I dig it. I think the Tracy guy, though, you're not being honest with us. I think you like him because, like yourself, he spent 6 years in college, and that's why he's the top of your board. The cornerback point, though, is a really good one because I think it's not just that Jonathan Jones is going to turn 31 early in the season. It's that the rest of the position is like a series of Russian dolls. Like Alex Austin's 6 foot, then Jonathan Jones is 5'9", and then Marcus Jones is 5'8". On a good day, you need some bigger bodies in there. I'm with you. All right, I've taken up too much of your time. This was one of the best episodes we've had in a very, very long time, and it's not just because we're 2 handsome gentlemen who share a first name. It's because we have giant heads, and we have just shared all of our good thoughts and research and takes and discussions about what was I would say a bombshell story, really, with a bombshell segment, and we dove deeper into this than I ever thought. So thank you, sir. We will have you back. And look, don't feel free to take your time. You don't have to go rush and see Cadlick. Kick back, relax. Like you've had a day.
Should I have a couple beers before I
yes, always advised in this podcast.
Cadlick?
Sometimes I do that by myself and tell people. So
well, it's 6 rings. Should I have a 6-pack to prepare for 6 rings? I don't know, I'm kind of a lightweight. If I get 6 beers in, the chances of me connecting and actually doing the podcast are pretty slim.
I don't know. Sounds like challenge accepted to me. Thank you, Andy.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Our first returning male fan, Joe Shoddy from West Hartford, Connecticut, one of, as I just remembered, dads of newborns listening to the podcast. I don't know if there's something in the wavelengths going through here, but I'm glad I've been able to help you guys kill some time. Joe, you look good for a guy who I know has not slept very much.
Oh, well, I'm doing my best. Credit to the whole team, my wife, and everyone around us who's helped us out. But we've been pretty lucky. So
excellent. Well, the Patriots, of course, in light of today's news, not as lucky as you have been. We just discussed that with Andy Hart. Full breakdown. I will remind everyone again, if you want to be in Joe's shoes now for a second time, to come on the show, ask a mailbag question, donate to Boston Children's Hospital, and we can bat around whatever you want for 5 to 10 minutes. What's on Joe's mind today is this quote, and this was via email. With Drake May currently the most likely pick at number 3 and the consensus that he needs a redshirt period to improve on things like footwork, how would that work? Last year, there was talk about him or how splitting practice reps between Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi hurt their game prep. So how would the team balance the need to get May or McCarthy reps while ensuring Jacoby Brissett is getting enough to be prepared for games? Seems like physical improvements could be more difficult to implement as opposed to mental ones that could be made up for by watching more tape. So you obviously put a lot of thought into this. I'm just going to let you keep on thinking and talking and go right ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, you and others reported that when we were in that mid-season period where it was who's going to start, is it Mac or is it Bailey, and basically it seemed like they were splitting practice reps 50-50. It didn't benefit either of them. We had 2 quarterbacks who were unprepared to play, as opposed to one who probably could have gotten more reps. So that's kind of where this conversation, I think you were talking with Doug a couple last week, and it was how does mechanically does it work if reps are what practice reps are what Drake May or JJ McCarthy or Michael Penix or Bo Nix or whoever they end up getting is best for their development. But at the same time, I don't want to be in the same position where we were last year, where it was an unprepared quarterback. I do think looking at this, it's that Brissett is familiar with the Van Pelt offense terminology a little bit. So I think he probably could benefit by not benefit, but he could go with fewer reps. I don't think he needs the traditional 95% of starter reps. So I think that's one way you could look at it. At the same time, I think they also have to the coaching staff and the team have to decide early on what kind of season they want this to be. And if it's a developmental season, then they have to, I think, go with the fact that maybe the starting QB is going to get fewer reps and kind of so that long term, whoever the rookie quarterback is, who seems inevitable, gets more practice reps. And maybe they aren't 1,000% prepared for every game, but it's going to help middle of the season next year to have a rookie or a second year QB that has a little more, NFL practice experience. But I'm curious to see where you're coming at this from too.
Sure. I think you hit it on the head without doing it directly, which is hard to do when you're hammering. You literally have to hit it directly. But the idea being, what is your goal? What do you want out of this season? And that's something that everyone can sit here and go, either tank, right, go for a top 5 pick, which it looks like they might have based on their schedule and their current over-under win total projection over in Vegas. Or do you want to compete and try to win and instill that culture? Understanding you still probably won't win very much. And what I would say is obviously that hinges on the quarterback. And I would say that decision probably will be made in mid-August because there's a component of this where you can, unlike preparing a quarterback like the Patriots were trying to do last year with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi, the goal was to win. That's what they were doing every single week, whether it looked like it or not. Secondarily, the things you talk about with Drake May, where I'm not fully convinced he needs a redshirt period, but I understand why folks say that, and I've seen the footwork. Don't get me wrong; that can be fixed with more individual work. There won't be a limit to the practice time where he can do the drills, face the pass rushers, get a couple of guys, and throw around and work on that part of his game. But the issue then becomes, what do you fall back on when you go 11 on 11, full speed, or a preseason game? Because as many folks have said, and it's a great quote, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall back on your training. So how strong can that training get him up to speed? And the reason I say mid-August is because at that point you would have multiple preseason games, right? Enough training camp practice to decide, have we fixed enough with Drake May? Is he possibly even a better option than Jacoby Brissett? And what does our timeline look like now? Because I don't think they'll know until around then whether to cut him loose, whether to say, okay, we got a lot more work to do. This might be a full redshirt season, or as you suggested, maybe just a period of time. And that's not a sexy answer. It's not a fun one, but I do think because when you identify what do you want, you'll know in mid-August. Before then, you can split it and go, he'll get all the second team reps. Jacoby's our starter. But in the meantime, we can work on some of the basic fundamental stuff. He'll need to fix his issues that then could allow him to go up to the first team because we're not going to be worried about him installing bad habits, which would prevent him, of course, from developing further into a franchise quarterback. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And I think, a lot of what I was thinking too is once a decision is he going to be the 2? Is he going to be the 3? And, the worst case scenario is you've seen with some of these rookie quarterbacks that come in and they say they need a period and then the starter gets hurt and week 1, week 2, and they're thrust into it. I think that's right. I think at the end of the day, and I do think looking at the defense, if he's running scout team, then he's going to have a lot of experience playing against a good defense, which I think down the line will help too. So, I think it's giving him as much individual work on the side as possible, recognizing that there's a finite amount of time that the coaching staff has for doing that.
Right. And they can lay these plans. Like, let's be clear, Jacoby's going to be the starter. He gets the first team reps. He's a veteran. He's earned it. He's going to be a leader for us. And it's hard to lead from the bench, right? But if he gets hurt in week 2, regardless of whether they think Drake May is ready or not, here are the keys, kid. Like, you've got to drive the car because we're just not going to ask Bailey Zappi if he's on the team. Maybe they draft a quarterback. Maybe they make a trade. Who knows what that looks like? So, another old saying, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. The Patriots are going to get punched a lot this season, and you're just trying your best to protect Drake May if he needs it. Though there are analysts, again, I'm kind of in a wait and see. Nate Tice from The Athletic and Yahoo Sports thinks he doesn't need a red shirt. He thinks he's the best prospect in the entire draft. Or at least among quarterbacks, I should say, ahead of Caleb Williams. So it's very much a TBD conversation. It does sound, though, to me that you are on the take Drake train as I am, and as we just heard from Andy Hart, that he is also. Are you on board?
I think so. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head to continue that analogy, which is he's got an incredibly high ceiling. 3 years from now, we could be having this conversation, and I think it's very obvious if he fails, there's we'll be able to point to say, hey, this is what happened. But I think I'm skeptical of JJ McCarthy. I know the Mac Jones comparisons are inaccurate, but it seems like someone he would be good on a good team and could be very well successful on the Vikings or another team that drafts him. But as you know, the supporting pieces aren't really there to go the good enough quarterback route. So I feel like the Patriots have to take the highest potential and kind of drag the rest of the roster behind it at this point. Hopefully using the rest of the draft to pick up some skill position or foundational pieces. So.
Yeah, and I would say too, because last week was Merrill Hodge week, right? Everyone's like, oh my God, Merrill Hodge said the thing. So we got to respond to the thing and say our things about if you take him, you will get fired. Well, these dudes, even Elliott Wolf, whose contract expires next month, just got hired. Like they've got the time to figure this out. And granted, again, you missing a franchise quarterback. Most teams are not the 49ers where you just bounce back and go to the Super Bowl anyway without Trey Lance. But they have the time to develop him. So it's not only that the rest of the roster isn't good enough to plug JJ McCarthy in and be like, okay, we could probably go to the wild card round of the playoffs and call it a day. You can take the high potential quarterback in the time to develop him. I'll say this though, because this just hit me as a very loose analogy and wrap up here. What do you think about quarterbacks, prospects as friends? Like if you took JJ McCarthy, you're gonna abide by all the rules. No one's getting arrested. He's great in great situations. We saw this with Mac Jones. But you don't really know how that friend's going to react when you're in need or like you've broken down on the side of the road. Are they going to come pick you up? Are they going to make a bad situation worse like we saw with Mac Jones? Where like Drake May is going to have a 10 out of 10 night. You want to go to Vegas with him. You want to go to Miami. But you just don't know which part of the Hangover movie you're going to experience with Drake May. Do you buy any sense of that? Should I use that on somebody else?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair analogy. It's
you're being very nice.
No, I think I would. The only way I'd say JJ McCarthy seems like someone who's going to come and pick you up at 2 a.m. and make sure you get tucked in. But it might be a less epic of an experience. But your I's will be dotted and your T's will be crossed. But you can't really go far beyond that.
Excellent. All right. Well, I will take that Drake May take, or maybe it's a Bo Nix take, and just kind of refine it. And we'll try that out. And hopefully this time next year, we'll have a better idea of whether we want to ditch it for good or move on to a new take and a new quarterback. That is Joe Ashadi from West Hartford, Connecticut. Second-time male fan making history here in the podcast. Thank you, sir, for donating and taking some of your time to spend it with here today.
Definitely. Thanks for having me on. And again, I said it last time, but I'll say it again. Thanks for doing what you do for Boston Children's and supporting that and pushing people to donate. It's always a pleasure to donate. And if the added benefit is being on the podcast and talking Pats, it's worth it. So thanks again for having me on.
Appreciate it, Joe.